Shout out to one and all. Shout out to one and all. We are online. We're streaming right now. Peace to all of you out there. And as you can see from the title, we're going to look at Zack Snyder's Superman references to Christ through, we have here Peter Paul Ruben, but there are going to be some other artists I'll mention very briefly in passing. And I find this very interesting because one of the things we noticed with this particular comic book movie is its relationship to art, literally relationship to art. And I remember people praising Thor Ragnarok for its artwork, and it's strange how they never. Well, I think they did praise Wonder Woman a bit for the animated artwork that was there, but no one really stopped to praise Zack Snyder in Batman v Superman for the wonderful artwork that's there, and it planted the seeds. Even in Man of Steel, we saw some animated artwork of a different type of design, but it had to do with Kryptonians. But no praise for Zack Snyder's, again, visionary movement with artwork in movies. And of course, Zack uses a sort of tapestry style of painting, almost like paintings you're looking at with Zack Snyder. And then all of a sudden, people were talking about how, all these paintings and painting-like works, which were, to me, just pale comparison to what Zack Snyder had done and Patty Jenkins had done in Wonder Woman. And I cite this because what I'm going to go is, again, layers deep. Everything that Zack Snyder does in terms of artwork, there is a significance to the artwork. It's not just superficial nonsense, not superficial nonsense. And I love how WB, allows their directors to delve deeply into the mythos and the lore of their characters. It's not some flippant, superficial nonsense that we see pulled off a number of times by these people trying to imitate them. And for my last video, spoke about if you have a passion, the passion of something, really. Oh no, I wasn't speaking in the video. Actually, I was having a dialogue on Twitter. Not much of a dialogue. I was actually responding to someone who was speaking about how should directors be fans of the comic book movies that they're doing, and should they do things to please the fans or do it for the fan base? And I specifically responded to that saying no and no. You don't have to be a fan of comic book movies to be a director of a film. It helps that you are a fan of it. But I do believe, and I don't believe, that they should be doing empty fan service. I say this because a lot of times people do not understand what a popularist view is of things, and popularist views of things doesn't necessarily mean those views of things are correct. It doesn't also mean that those views will stand the test of time. There are two different things. Now, I know I was having a discussion online with Trent Osborne about this, but we'll get into that in more detail another time. What I want to do, though, is speak about Zack Snyder and art, and how he just captures that art and interprets that art and then puts it into his movies. And I think it's very important to understand in context what I'm saying, and it'll make sense, as we go along. And I don't think there's any other director who has done it that well in terms of comic book movies. All the directors I've seen, especially in the MCU, it's been very flippant how they just throw things around. Again, sort of empty pleasing of fan base. They try to find certain things that they think the fan base would like, superficial stuff, and they kind of basically, I think, run scams on people, scams on people. And basically, people come out the movie saying, yes, this is what I wanted to see. Yeah. And they really, when they reflect on it, it's effectively nothing that they have watched. Quite frankly, empty statement as far as I'm concerned. So I actually don't appreciate those things. Okay. And I tell people that over and over again. But I have to read first from Psalms. So I'm going to read from Psalms 121. It's a psalm everyone pretty much may know who's a religious person. It's a very popular psalm because people have actually made songs in this psalm. And the song, some people know it as My Help. I will lift up my eyes unto the hills. They know it as that. Psalms 121. I'm going to go into it, and I'm going to look at it in a different way as usual. Usually I always give you a different perspective on things. So it says, I will lift up my eyes unto the hills. From where comes my help? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. and he will not suffer your foot to be moved. He that keeps you will not slumber nor sleep. Behold, he that keeps Israel shall not slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. He is the shade upon your right hand. Very important. The sun shall not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. Now, it didn't say the sun wouldn't come out. It didn't say the moon wouldn't come out. It said it wouldn't smite you. Remember that. And the Lord shall preserve you from all evil. He shall preserve your soul. The Lord shall preserve your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forever. Now, I'm a guy, I sell water and I sell drinks. And I'm in the sun all the time, all day long, okay? And I get beaten down by the sun. Now, it says the sun shall not smite you by day. Why? Because I don't get beaten down in a tremendous way because I drink water. And if you drink water, you know, if you have plants in your yard, I don't know how many people live in the tropics here, but if you live in the tropics, to protect your plants against the heat of the sun destroying them, you have to feed them water. Now, some plants can't take direct sunlight. That's a different story. And they have to be in shade, which leads us to what he said here. The Lord is your shade upon your right hand. Right hands of power. Then when we talk about my right hand man or right hand of power, we're talking about my go-to guy. And your right hand is the go-to part of you, the powerful part of you that executes. Hence, right hand. So your right hand of power is generally the part of you that executes things, gets things done, and gets them done in an effective, executed way, crisp, clear. All right. So that's why they call it right hand versus your left hand. Now, it's very important to understand. It's not that the sun doesn't beat down on you. It's that it won't smite you. It won't destroy you. And the only reason the sun and the moon won't destroy you is because you're filled with the water of life. We talk about the tree of life. We talk about living water. Living water is a spirit of goodness that's within you that no matter what happens, that spirit keeps on bubbling up in you, and it's excess. It spills over. It infects other people. Other people start drinking because a lot of people are thirsty, and so that spirit is disseminated. And it's very important to understand that when you have a river of life flowing in you, it's literally called a river of life flowing in you. It breathes forth more life, so that other people are, you know, they get even more enhanced in their living when they're around you, and they feel refreshed and all of that stuff that goes along with it. And they do ridiculous things that would never be possible because they're just filled with this hopefulness, this refreshing, this love, this life that is within them. So, and it's very healing. Now, miracles do happen. For those people who don't know, people are talking about the Spirit of God doesn't move and then there's no resurrection power anymore and blah, 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 blah. No, that's not true. And it was just yesterday I was watching a story, a depiction on 3ABN. My mom's Adventist. So I was just getting a little end snippet of 3ABN. That was really pretty cool because at the end of 3ABN, it was talking about Martha was talking to Jesus, right? And her brother Lazarus was dead, okay? And she said, man, if you would just come a little earlier, you know, he wouldn't have died. And because she believed that he was the Christ, the Messiah. And Jesus said to her, he will be raised again. And she said, yeah, I believe that in the last day, you know, the last day he'll be ready. He said he'll be resurrected. And Jesus said, no. You don't understand. You don't understand. I am the resurrection. And that's when Jesus spoke right there. When he said, I am the resurrection, he wasn't speaking as a human. I think that's something that a lot of people miss. They don't understand that there's a disconnect there. When Jesus said that, he wasn't speaking as a human entity. See, that's the thing that I'm trying to get people to see. God is not, we think of God as this physical thing, an entity, a physical thing. God is not that. I try to explain that to people over and over again. So when Jesus speaks certain things, they're beyond entities. When Jesus said, I am the resurrection. Okay, so what is resurrection? Resurrection is The raising up, that's why it's called resurrection. The raising up of something that was not. Okay? That was done for. So you can resurrect an old building. You can resurrect a destroyed building. You can resurrect a person. You can resurrect hope. You can resurrect, and so on and so on and so on and so on. Jesus explained what he was saying. So when he said, I am the resurrection, he didn't stop right there. He said, and the life. Jesus was telling Martha something beyond entities. Life is beyond an entity, any given entity. It is a quality, it is an idea, it is a spirit that we try to understand, but we cannot identify, we cannot pinpoint it any particular place. In fact, we call it an overall characteristic or quality that we've noticed. Okay? Jesus is identifying himself as that. He just went past entities to a concept or a idea or a way of defining something. And he's saying, I'm that. You understand? And because he's that, the resurrection is possible. And I'm trying to say to you guys that in this scripture here, because it's very important for me to try and say this to you guys so you can understand. I try to elucidate things in a way that you would understand, because they're all around you. I mean, everything's living, right? And we talk about life all the time, but it's kind of abstract, because you can't really see life, can you? You can't really see life. Well, guess what? That life that you're speaking of, the life that we exist in right now, life, that is God. That is Jesus. I don't know if this is making any sense to anyone. You know, when you do a kind act, the action, the goodness, that is God. That is Jesus. You understand? That's why we don't see God. That's why we don't fixate on images. It's about qualities, characteristics. It's about that. All right. Anyways, so David's talking here, and that's how you see God. You see, you know, I wrote a song a long time ago. It was called Go. And basically, I was explaining to people that people see God in actions, in a lifestyle, in behavior. They don't see God as necessarily an entity. I'm not saying that God can't appear as entities. He's done it thousands, millions of times. But to really get a good picture of God, you cannot nail it down to and define him or even understand him as an entity, because he created all entities. So it doesn't make sense. The only reason Jesus came to earth, there are two reasons why he came to earth. The first one is he came in a format, a relatable format we could understand God as. So he decided to demonstrate God or show people who God was in a relatable format. The second reason why Jesus came to earth, and this is the most important one, really, is so that he could not only bear humanity, but also be able to overcome the shortcomings of humanity and give humanity back that power to do so. Because no human being so far could have been able to do that and pass it on to other human beings. Most importantly, a human being might have individually done it, and God took them. But as a collective, being able to pass that on to other human beings so that they could do it, no human being was able to do that. All right, so that's the two reasons. And they're very straightforward. And so Jesus is trying to show us who God was and who God is. And he was best able to do so. I mean, his whole entire life showed us that, but he was best able to do that and show us who God really is when he was crucified. Okay? When he was crucified. And not only that, if it only stopped at his crucifixion, that would have been not enough. He had to show that he had the power to overcome all of that and demonstrate it and be glorified for it. And so when he rose from the dead, that was very important because it showed how much, how much God can reverse anything. And it also showed that everything he said he was, he was. He said, I am the life. He said, I am the resurrection. He said all of these things. He said, I lay down my life, I'll pick it back up again. Okay. He showed, demonstrated, and showed that he was so much more. And if you follow the path of goodness, it's so much more than anything you could ever imagine or think. That nothing can stop you. Nothing can stop goodness, because goodness pervades in everything. And even the evil things need to be sustained by goodness. Good things have to happen to evil people and evil things and evil entities so that they can exist. And that in and of itself shows that goodness is greater than evil, and it'll always be. For evil to exist, there must be goodness. And evil will not exist at a certain point in time. It will disappear. Okay, so keeping it on, moving on, therefore, I was trying to explain this to you because I think a lot of times we look at these scriptures and we interpret them very much on face value, which is okay. There's that level. But then if you go a little deeper into it, it shows you the whole purpose of having goodness happen to everything. Goodness wants to invade everything. Everything must be good. Everything needs to be awesome. Everything needs to be great. So in order for goodness to do that, it has to be able to withstand all the things that are bad. And so you have to understand, it's not, the understanding is really simple. It's not that bad things won't happen. It's that you will be able to withstand those bad things when they happen, and you will ultimately triumph over them, as we saw with Jesus. All right, so this is very important to understand. And it's not triumph over them because of yourself. It's not, because it's just the nature of goodness. Goodness conquers over evil because goodness was there first. And because of goodness, evil exists. It's one of the most paradoxical things, but goodness gives everybody a fair shake to choose whatever they want to choose. But in the end, evil will be over flooded by goodness, and it'll just be goodness left. That's what really is going to happen. So there's no real battle really between good and evil if you think about it, because evil needs good to sustain itself. Evil is defined by good. It is against good. So therefore, evil is defined by good, which means good supersedes evil every single time. It's the bar from which everything is measured. So if you think about it, at the end of the day, there's only good will be remaining. And that's why God knew this already. And this is why I say only God will remain. In other words, only God will dominate everything, because he supports everything. He's the foundation of everything. And so obviously you cannot destroy your foundation. You could try. You just destroy yourself in the process. So that's what it is. And that's something natural. You would realize that very soon. You quickly come to that conclusion, at the end of the day. So this is what the scripture is basically saying. And it's not speaking necessarily in time. It's speaking beyond that and looking beyond time as well. So that's something that I wanted to share with you guys, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about, as far as I can see, there's a lot of misunderstanding about God. And there's always that tendency to want to idolize him, to put an image of him before us. And there was a reason he said no graven images, no images whatsoever. There was a reason. It wasn't that it's that you can take an iconography which reminds you of God, but then there's another problem when you start to worship the iconography and not God himself. That is to say, you worship the image of God and not God. And we tend to do this a lot. We put shrines up on things. We put shrines up on ideas and people and and certain concepts. We suddenly worship that more than anything else. So you have to be careful about those things. Okay. Um, and it's all about, remember, at the end of the day, of course you have to have a belief system. At the end of the day, it's about goodness in and of itself. That's what you have to look at. It's these attributes, qualities. Of course, no quality has precedence over another quality per se, because you want to have all of them. I remember Peter talking about this, and he sort of broke it down and showed what he thinks is the developmental curve. And he's saying, add to this, and add to this, and add to this. And I thought about it, and I was like, but you need to have all of them. I mean, I guess what he's trying to say is, in essence, that, as you grow, these things will come with you, and he's kind of using a language which is more verb filled, saying, take this with you and take that with you. But in essence, it's hard to cognitively think, okay, I'm going to just work on brotherly love today. I mean, you could try, but there's a lot of other things that come along with that. And I mean, that's a great aspiration, don't get me wrong. And it's something you can say and think about doing consciously every day. But I was just thinking that I feel that these are natural things that come together. It's kind of like breathing. I think you don't think, okay, now I need to take my next breath. No, you don't. It just naturally happens. And I feel that the growth in the Spirit of God is not so much about us trying to do anything, but more understanding what we have and how we do what we do. More of an understanding thing, because it's naturally happening. It's like you don't constantly think next day, okay, now I'm going to exfoliate my skin because last night I had to pass out impurities, and now I will urinate out impurities, and now my liver will clean out its sides and then add some glycogen to my body. You don't think these things, right? These are just things that happen, right? And I think it's the same way with the Spirit. Certain things happen. Now you have to obey him when he tells you to do this or do that or go here or go there. But it's not like you are literally keeping tabs on everything that the Spirit is doing and you're regulating that. You can't do that. It's not possible, So I think that I usually try to just focus on, meditating on certain things, because we all have a cognizant mind and God gave us choice. So, you can choose which direction you want to go in terms of good things, because there's many trees of the garden. And, as him, shine for him in that sort of way. I think trying to go into the itty-gritty details, understanding the itty-gritty details is fantastic, but necessarily going into the nitty-gritty details of trying to do these things, it's very impossible to do. Only God could pretty much put it together the way it is, because just in your natural body, which decays and stuff, you don't have any cognitive, well, you have cognitive control over how your body controls itself, but you don't go into the micromanaging on the cellular level of what is going on in your body. You just couldn't keep track of that stuff. You go mad. Okay. So I'm just saying, similarly, it's nice to understand what your body is doing, but it's not necessarily that you would go and try and dabble in that and have cognitive control of those things. And I think that's the same way. I think we should sort of look at life. And it's nice to have the understanding of it now. Oh, okay. So, and now you're aware of what's happening, the knowledge part of it, the understanding part of it. So I just wanted to share that scripture with you. It was very, very prolific scripture. It's very common amongst religious people. They cite it a lot for various reasons. So let me get into what I'm going to talk about today, which is Zack Snyder's Superman references to the Christ. And, as I said before, Batman v Superman is one of those really interesting pieces, because in Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, we had this painting here. Now, Zack Snyder is known, if you know him, he in all of even the way how he depicts characters and the way how he moves them, they're like paintings. It's like moving paintings. And it's very interesting because he takes this high level of art for a comic book movie. And you can tell he respects the characters and the genre of comic books and how they tell their stories. And therefore, he goes about telling his stories in a way that comic books would do so, but not just in a comic booky kind of cheap comic booky kind of way, but actually with some depth to it, to some mythos, and resorting to some famous artists. So, for instance, this art that you see here, which was showing you angels versus devils, right? Angels versus devils. And you can see the angel has a sword in his hand, and he has the host of heaven. And then you see the devils down below, and they're denoted by the dark depictions that you see here. That was based on a number of works, okay? A number of works. And it's interesting when you go into it, it really makes sense. It's interesting. It's very interesting. So this is one of them. This work was done by Gustav Dor in 1866, and it speaks about the triumph of Christianity over paganism. And if you look very carefully, you'll see that Zeus is the one being knocked out there, and Michael the archangel is knocking out Zeus and all the pantheon of gods there, and you see that being pushed back. And this is a motif that is not just was not just common in the 1800s. It actually was common in the earlier times as well. Okay, I mean, Gustav Dor, who was a famous illustrator in the 1800s, he was mostly illustrated for books and all that kind of stuff. Well, this is one of his rare paintings where we found his oil painting where he actually had this sentiment here. And it's interesting talking about Christianity versus paganism and how that all panned out, and thought of the times, the thought of the day. But that's not all. But again, Zack Snyder always keeping these Christocentric themes, but he also tied into this piece of work, again by Gustav Dor, illustrated from Paradise Lost by John Milton. And in his book, Paradise Lost, Gustav Dor illustrates Michael casting out the rebel angels from heaven. Lucifer and the rebel angels from heaven with a thunderbolt, as you can see there. And you can see in his hand, again, is the drawn sword. And of course, Lucifer has this long spear. Now, it's very important to remember a long spear. Okay, a long spear. Remember that. And again, implicit in this is Christianity overthrowing paganism. Okay, and that's actually also a subtle nuance that's being shared in this portrait. And it actually was a thought that was around Europe for quite a while, especially because now this Gustav Dor here, who is Italian, I believe, illustrator and painter, he did works for the English. Now it's interesting talking about this because there was actually a clash a couple centuries earlier between Spain and England, between Catholicism and the Protestant groups, and we'll discuss that in some detail as we go on here in this discussion. But it's suffice it to say that it's interesting that Gustav Dor, he's working along with John Milton this time, and this book was Paradise Lost, and again a lot of religious works. It's very interesting because even during the Dark Ages, which was a little bit earlier than this time, the 1800s, even through the Dark Ages, where the church, this is the Roman Catholic Church, was at, talking about heresy, and there was the Spanish Inquisition and all that crazy stuff was going on. Even then, and that was a pushback, by the way, the Catholic Church was a pushback, strange as it sounds, to trying to purge Jews. There was a time when Jews were kicked out of Spain and they ended up in Portugal. Okay, and then some of them spread over the four corners of the earth. And it's very interesting. First, there was this response, Christianity's response, a pushback on Judaism. But not every kind of Judaism, which is really funny, because the Judaism that they pushed back against was actually the ones who were the forerunners for Christianity. And it became a threat. And so it's very interesting how they pushed them out of Spain. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, kicked them out of Spain, and they ended up in Portugal, finding what we call amnesty now. Not amnesty. What is it? Is it with refugee amnesty? I think it's refugee amnesty. Yeah, where they get shelter and stuff. And then they started going to the four corners of the earth. And it's interesting that after that, we had a pushback on that. Not quite, a little bit later on, via King James and all these guys, where we had the pushback on Christianity. We had Martin Luther leading the charge, pushing against Christianity through Germany and Austria, and then in England we had to push back there. And in the somewhere around the 1800s thereabouts, we had Anglicanism, which was a pushback on Catholicism. And the reason is that it was a pushback because they did not embrace all of the praying to the sainthood and that kind of craziness. They didn't believe in that. And then it was interesting because, remember, what a lot of people don't know is Catholicism is broken up into various segments. And there's Catholicism in the East, and it's known as Eastern Orthodoxy. And you have Greek Eastern Orthodoxy, you have Ethiopian Orthodoxy, you got Russian Orthodoxy, and so on. And so just to kind of keep it simple, the pushback on, okay, so we had Orthodoxy, okay, but we also had we had Judaism, which bred sort of this orthodoxy to some degree. And then we had Roman Catholicism, and Roman Catholicism really became prevalent under Constantine. Okay. And it is a long story short that Nero had kind of wiped out some of the people, and there were some other Caesars that wiped out some of the real Christians out there. But anyway, we had this new brand of Christianity that came up, and then we had Roman Catholicism that rose up through Rome. And then we had Eastern Orthodoxy that kind of separated and said, we don't believe in that kind of stuff. And then they believe in the monotheism, and some of the Eastern Orthodoxy believes in monotheism, not Trinity. Okay, not Trinitarianism, and that's a whole other story for another day. I know I'm sounding like I'm rambling here, and some of you guys are like, what the hell is he talking about? Okay, fine, I understand. But at the end of the day, my point being this, that, there was a pushback against Judaism, and then there was a pushback against Catholicism, okay? And so that leads us to 1866. But the interesting thing is, there were some people, illustrators and painters, who worked for both. They worked for the Protestants, the Protestantism, and they also worked for the Roman Catholicism. So that's the interesting thing about these paintings. These paintings, some of these guys worked for both sides, and Gustave Doré was one of them. And then I'm talking about another guy who was a devout Catholic, but he ended up, working for both sides as well. And he wasn't even Spanish, and he wasn't English. Okay, and I'll talk about him in a minute. But suffice it to say that this painting, that Zack Snyder used, it's very interesting, all these intricate details. Zack is a very detailed person, and this is one of them. So we have the combination of these two paintings by Gustave Doré, which I find very interesting. And this is just the triumph over paganism. And now paganism is very interesting, because paganism now, it has to do with England and some of those Nordic regions, Germania and that stuff, where they have, they had paganism. Now, paganism is interesting because in and of itself, it's funny when we talk about the slave trade and all these other slaves didn't know about Jesus and stuff. And, it's really funny because some of those slaves were from the tribe of Judea. They were from the Israel tribes. And some of these people knew God better than the slave masters who claimed to know God. It's just one of these ironic situations. And it's ironic that paganism, certain versions of it, know Jesus better. This is just so whack. They call him by a different name, but they know Jesus better, some versions of paganism again, because some of those pagan people actually came or were at least slaves or were cultures around Israel. So they were actually influenced by Israel. It's just crazy how, no matter how you look at it, the gospel, the good news about God and who he is, has gone all around the world. And even when the people were going on their crusades, the crusades that, again, the Roman Catholics are guilty of doing in a certain way that was good and bad, because it worked out for good, but it was bad at the same time. Those crusades, anyway, where, the church went all over the world, it was interesting that they actually met people who already knew God. And Mormonism, interestingly, tells this side of the story, even though, again, I don't agree with everything that a Mormon believes. Absolutely not. But the interesting thing is their monotheistic understanding of God. And then the interesting thing that they were saying that the Native Americans knew about God because, they knew about Jesus and all. It's very interesting because at the end of the day, it looked like, these pioneers that came from persecution, the Mormons, not the Mormons, sorry, the, what you call them, Puritans and all these guys that came across from persecution in Europe and they came to America. Yeah, but these Puritans and all these guys who supposedly were Puritans, they ended up killing some of the Native Americans, right? They went and shot them up and stuff, right? And first in the name of the Queen, and then next in the name of their own self, right? So if they were really Puritans and they really believed in God, why are they shooting these people? All because they were pagans, right? I'm just saying. Anyway, so I was saying to you guys anyway. I know you guys are laughing. Some of you, if you listen to this video, but because I'm saying so many different things at once, and you're like, what the heck does this have to do with Zack Snyder and his paintings? Well, Zack Snyder comes from, at least he was raised as a Christian Scientist. Okay, first time I heard about this, and basically Christian Scientists believe that through the power of prayer, people can miraculously be healed. That's one of the things they believe. Okay. And it's interesting because I always found that Zack Snyder had this spiritual connection to stuff that we in Christianity hold near and dear. So I was thinking to myself, what's up with Zack? I mean, I don't know if he is a Christian Scientist anymore or what he is, but the interesting thing about it is that he gives this tribute in his as best as possible as he can. And that's why people said his stuff is so preachy and what about God, and why are they trying to preach to us? Because this painting is literally calling back to religious paintings. This painting here, and it's very blatant. Like Zack Snyder's like very blatant with this one. This one's about paganism being cast out and Christianity taking the fore. And it's a political step, yes, but also at the same time, it's saying, okay, Europe is being cleansed, and now they all believe in Jesus. And it's funny because they're the pushing back against the Roman Catholics who did very much the same thing. They went into different places with their crusades and knocked out the people. They didn't want to hear what they had to say because how far are they concerned? You're pagan heresy. Accept the church or else. Okay. So so I'm not saying, and now they know Roman Catholics will tell you today, oh man, that was a big blooper we made. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to show you is that this is a reflection of some of that. And what Lex Luthor did was he was saying, you know, what you call the good guys, they're probably the bad guys. And the bad guys, they're probably the good guys. That painting should be upside down. Okay. Now, he meant it in a very narcissistic, cynical way. But at the end of the day, he truly believed it. Right. In his mind, he thought that he was the savior. He was the good guy. And Superman was the bad guy. And that people just didn't get the memo. They didn't understand that this guy is false. He is the false god, like they said he was. And he actually is going to, in the end, trick them. And they're going to fall for it. And then they're going to be in trouble, man. Okay? So I'm just telling you, you take this picture and you flip it upside down. And then Zeus is hitting Michael with the thunderbolt. And notice that the thunderbolt is the equivalent of a spear. Because when Gustav Dorr does it, here hold on a second. When Gustav Dorr does it here, Lucifer, he's got a spear in his hand. Whereas Michael, he has swords and he has a lightning bolt, which is interesting. It's kind of Zeus kind of flipped upside down in a way. Anyway, so, and of course, Jesus said it in the New Testament. If you read the Bible and you believe that stuff, he said, I beheld Satan fall from heaven as lightning. Okay, Lucifer, sorry. Okay, and Lucifer was light himself. So it's interesting that he comes out of heaven as lightning. Is that he's jetting out of heaven? He himself is running away? I don't know. I just thought about that. I never thought about it that way. But anyway, the point is, this is an 1866 illustration. This is not a painting. This is an illustration that's found in the book Paradise Lost, which is very interesting. That would be called that. And you see Satan and his minions being cast out of heaven. And there above is Michael and his angels coming down on them. All right. Now, there, like I said before, this concept, this artwork, this understanding of paganism being removed by Christianity was not new. Okay, back in the 1600s, there was also another painter. His name was Peter Paul Ruben. And Peter Paul Ruben was a Flemish painter. But like I said before, he was a devout Catholic, but yet he worked both for Protestants and the Catholic Church, doing paintings for both of them, which is very interesting. All right. And he also had a depiction with the fall, and the fall being not the fall of mankind in this case, but the fall of rebel angels. And I was supposed to have another photo here, but I left it out of this one, so it's all good. Some other time I'll look at that. But here it's 1618 to 1620, which is like 200 and something years before Gustav Doré even did anything. Peter Paul Ruben, he did this depiction. He was a very prolific, classical, Christocentric sort of painter. Okay, or should I say he was pro-Christianity. Okay, he was devout Catholic, and it's very interesting that this piece of work as well would have been a contributor to this piece of work here. And again, look at the classical way how it is done, the classical sort of it feels like it's going to be, could be in a mural in a church. All right. And if you look at the intricate designs here, I don't know if you can see them, but there are all these little intricate little pieces of stuff showing that it's painted on a canvas. Okay. I don't know if you can see the little crack marks there. And, if I had gotten another depiction, which is a little bit darker, you would see it a little bit better. But I like the classical design. That's the whole idea behind it. Anyways, so moving on here. So, you get that classical look. Okay. Yes, so Peter Paul Ruben, he was also one who did these kinds of designs. Now, it's very interesting what you're seeing here. It's almost like you see hell here. And again, the darkened look of these angels as they go downwards, okay? And you see here Michael here knocking them down on some of his angels there, okay? And they're getting knocked out of heaven, of course. And this is from this is earlier work, okay? But yet at the same time, you do understand there's a parallel between this and paganism. And if you go and read up on Peter Paul Ruben's Fall of the Rebel Angels, you'll see that they were also talking about how the Roman Catholic Church was conquering over paganism, all right? And this is kind of around the time, or a little bit after the time, of the great Crusades and that kind of thing. This is the Baroquean art, by the way. This is the Baroque era, okay? And he was a very famous Baroque painter. And it's very interesting because when you look at Zack Snyder, when he hinted to the photo that he was talking about with all the technology at his disposal, why would Batman build a spear? Remember we talked about a spear? Okay. And it was a spear that pierced Jesus' side, as you can see here in this Baroquean drawing done by artwork done by Peter Paul Ruben. Okay, which is Christ on the cross between two thieves. And you see them piercing his side here. He's dead, and they're piercing his side here. Now, it's very important to understand it's a spear that was involved there. You remember Lucifer had a spear. You remember Zeus is carrying something that's equivalent to a spear. And it's very important to understand the connotations behind the understanding of paganism, the difference between paganism and Christianity. And now, even though Christianity enveloped some of the attributes of paganism, politically speaking, Christianity as a political entity had overcome paganism. We don't hear much about paganism today. The most popular religion in the world is, Roman Catholicism is the most popular religion in the world. And they took over the world, okay? And Christianity is kind of hinged on that, kind of like the new age of Christianity, the Protestantism and all of that other stuff that came out of Roman Catholicism. So if you think about it, they're constantly speaking of their triumphs over Satan, and Satan tends to be paganism, or someone who does not believe in the Christocentric sort of way of looking at things. And basically the Western world is Christocentric, and even the Eastern world with Eastern Orthodoxy is Christocentric. So it's mostly the more, Islam is there, and it's pretty popular too. But when you think about it, the majority of people are Christian. And huge, we're talking about, while Islam, people who follow Islam are about 1 billion, Christianity is like four times bigger than that. You know what I'm saying? 4 times. It's like 4 times more Christians or Christ story, in the world. All right. Now, and to be honest with you, this has been so for a long time, actually. And even Islam acknowledges Jesus Christ as, not, he calls him one of many messiahs, but he's also considered separate and important. So even they don't deny him. But the point is that you see that Zack Snyder here, he's basically looking at this Baroque art by Peter Paul Ruben. So it provoked me to think, okay, uh, Peter Paul Ruben has covered some of the concepts, and you can say, well, that's so for many famous painters of the Baroque era. You know, they did Christocentric themes, they did Christianity themes, right? You could say that, but Peter Paul Ruben was a very popular one, which is why Zack Snyder pulled from his stuff. And it made me think, you know, let me have a look at some of the other Peter Paul Ruben paintings, and let's see if any of them align conceptual wise or even visually with what Zack Snyder did in any of his DCEU movies. And it got very interesting from there on in. And I'm pretty sure, you know, you may know this famous painting by Peter Paul Ruben, which is Descent from the Cross. And it's very interesting that the parallel between that and what they do with Superman is very, very similar. In fact, Wonder Woman actually holds Superman's hand the same way how this hand is held here. Batman, he's holding, okay, Superman was in a sheet here. They carry him down with a sheet. Here they use Superman's cape. Batman's using Superman's cape to carry him down here. You have a woman on the right, woman on the left, woman on the right, woman on the left. In fact, Wonder Woman takes Superman, hands him, rests him down, and Amy Adams's Lois Lane holds him just like this in the movie. It's really interesting that literally Zack is kind of pulling shot for shot. And you know what's interesting? In the background, we see a cross, as if they're pulling Superman down from his cross. You know what I'm saying? And you know, all of us have a cross to bear. There's a metaphor to that, and there's a lot more explanation to it. When Superman was pulled down from, not Superman, Jesus was pulled down from the cross. And by the way, there's the cross right there. As he's being pulled down from his cross, it means that his burden that he was carrying, he has now been able to be relieved of it, and other people are relieving of that burden. So there's a symbolism to that. But it's interesting that the same sort of metaphor is put here, and it's very clear to me that Zack Snyder is pointing to Jesus, and he's not doing an antichrist kind of thing where people deify Superman, but in fact, he's pointing to the symbolism that it represents, the deeper meaning behind it. And I found that so powerful because nobody else in Hollywood has done that. In fact, all the depictions of Superman we've seen in Hollywood from live action has deified Superman as the be all and end all, which is why Superman 1978 can be considered to some degree as blasphemy for a Christian person. And I can understand why Christian people would be saying, why are you talking about Superman? Okay, that is an antichrist symbol. You know, that's supposed to try and imitate the Messiah, but it's not the Messiah. And people keep on looking at Superman as if he's the Messiah. Okay, and Superman's symbol is a very popular symbol, right? And for the first time, you know, Zack Snyder, I remember the outcry, you know, these were two Jewish guys that made Superman and we're pitting it off of Moses and all the nut. I just saw the huge public outcry about this. But what amazes me is that Zack Snyder boldly pulled the symbolism and analogy together. He put that cross in the background for a reason. Of course, we saw there were three crosses, indicating three crosses because, remember, there were two thieves on the cross next to Jesus. So those three crosses symbolize, Zack was saying, this is the death of Christ. And remember, Batman v Superman came out on an Easter. Zack purposely put it out on an Easter, so people would remember Jesus Christ. He did this for those in Christendom, and he was very clear on what he was doing. And the paintings, Zack keeps on doing his stuff based on paintings. There's a significance to it. It's not this airy-fairy nonsense that we see, you know, in other comic book movies, and they say, oh, look at that picturesque painting. Look at our painting like that is. And it's cheap foolishness to bring people's attention to foolishness. This stuff has substance. And people say, well, you know, Batman v Superman was one of the great pieces of work. Well, no, we can't stop at Batman v Superman. No, we're not stopping at that. We're moving on. And while Joss Whedon had influence in Justice League, Zack intended to pay tribute to Jesus's resurrection. All right? And literally, again, not as visually similar, but still similar to none respect, we can take Peter Paul Ruben's work again. This time, his earlier work, 1611 to 1612. By the way, this is just a little by the way note here. Somewhere in the latter part of Peter Paul Ruben's life, because he died in 1640, he did this depiction of the descent from the cross. Okay? And what's very interesting about that is when you look at that depiction, which Zack Snyder actually does quite well, it's one of those depictions that symbolically is a lot more mature. There's a certain type of art, and there are different types of art in different eras, right? And I'll go back to something else that I saw in BVS, but let me just get back to Justice League. So this was an earlier work by Peter Paul Ruben, and it's the resurrection of Christ. And here you see Christ is resurrected. You see the blinding light on him here, and you see that the soldiers, they can't look. Look at that. They put their hands over their face. Some of them are getting knocked over. Some of them are running away. Now, this is the impressive thing about this. Look at this carefully. It's like a blinding light, as if Jesus has been resurrected from the dead. And what is happening to all of the Justice League members? Batman is getting blown backwards. Wonder Woman has to block her face and withstand the blast. Aquaman is dived back and he's withstanding the blast. And look at Cyborg. Look at them braced. It is literally paying tribute to the resurrection of Christ. Which reminds me, it didn't come out. Justice League didn't come out on an Easter, which would have been really awesome if they could have gotten it pulled off and come off on an Easter. But I would say this: Zack Snyder has given us the two parts of Christ's atonement for us and overcoming of sin. And that's why I wanted to pick particularly Psalms 121 to talk. Psalms 121 to talk about, because this is basically the depiction of this. It's very, very significant that goodness conquers evil. This is where all these superhero movies base their stuff on. And for the first time, Zack Snyder actually points to something beyond the superhero and shows you what the superhero's etymology is and what it represents. He links Superman directly to Jesus Christ. And Superman is pointing to Jesus Christ. It's not about pointing to Superman anymore. And that's why a lot of people were angry and they were like, "Oh, no, that's not my Superman. You know, he's preaching too much," because they viscerally felt the shift. And they viscerally felt that Zack was focusing his attention on Jesus. And it's just amazing. I tell you, Zack took the combination of Roman Catholicism and Protestantism. It's incredible what he did, in my opinion. I don't know if he was conscious of it. I don't know. And he combined them together to say, hey, peace, be still. It's all about Christ. And I found that to be fundamentally powerful. You know, his movie Justice League Come Together pretty much is saying he's not promoting ecumenicalism, because he's specifically speaking about Jesus. And I'm being very intellectual with you guys. I'm sorry about that. But he's actually getting the focus back to where it should be. And if I were to speak a little bit more on this topic, I know there are some of you out there who are atheists and you just don't believe in God and you think this is a myth. I understand. But for me as a Christian, for me as a believer in something greater than myself, for me who believes in goodness and believes in saving, not just saving to give a second chance, but saving to transform someone into something better, so that it's a transformative salvation, a transformative cleansing. For me, you can't get it better than this in a superhero movie. And that's why I defend Justice League, the theatrical cut. Yes, I know Whedon wasn't there. I know Whedon's a Wiccan, or he's promoting pagan values. But I actually love it because, as I told you before, in the history of these things, paganism was supposed to be pushed out the way. But even in that supposedly wrong religion, if I can use that word, all those words there were wrong, but it's okay. A total misunderstanding of it. But we put them in inverted commas. Even there, Christ prevails. And if you want to talk about paganism being overcome by Christianity, this is the way you can say Christianity swallowed it up, like good swallowed up evil. because everything, the fabric and the foundation of all these things comes from Christ, if you truly believe in him. And so no matter which way the sun beats on you or the moon, and by the way, some people worship the sun and some people worship the moon, right? So what are you saying? The Bible is being paganistic here? No. It said whatever, even when the sun beats down the moon, it's all about what's in you that helps you to withstand these things. That's why Paul can say, I can be all things to all people. And another time he says, what is an idol? It's nothing. Because it's where your focus is, folks, where your attention is at. It's not about compromising your belief systems. It's about so that you can see and understand and be able to preach the gospel and God through anything. Through anything. And I mean that in a double meaning. I mean through any situation and about anything. Without fear. And so that is what I try to share with you guys. And I found that to be beautiful, that he took a comic book movie and he preached Jesus. He preached the gospel through 2 comic book movies. In fact, through 3 comic book movies. He preached the gospel. And for me, he took the biggest platform ever and he knew he was going to get flack for it. And he relentlessly preached it. And for me, when you can preach the gospel using paganism, using Catholicism, using Protestantism, using Eastern Orthodoxy, when you can preach the same story, but you can use different lenses so that different people can understand it, that makes it powerful. Then he took pop culture. He took Greek mythology. He took a Norse mythology. And he was able to preach it. And no matter who goes there, which director came there and tried to block it out, it couldn't be blocked. They tried to dilute it down. It couldn't be diluted down. Thank God. You got to understand what I'm saying. That the gospel is bigger, folks, than just what language you talk. What culture you came from, what religion you grow up on. Praise God.